I lost her for 11 seconds, and in those 11 seconds the whole world tilted. That is the thing no one tells you. You can be holding your daughter's hand, you can be 3 feet from her, you can have planned the entire afternoon around the size of the crowd and the number of exits, and still the world finds 11 seconds to take her. A man with a stroller crossed in front of me. A tour group surged the other way, all raised phones and shoulders. I shifted her bag higher and turned my head, only for a breath, to find the gap I'd been told would let us out of the press of bodies. And when I turned back, the small, warm weight that had been against my hip was gone, and the strap of her little quilted backpack was loose in my fingers, and the hand I had been holding was holding nothing. I had not even wanted to come. That is the part I keep snagging on, all these months later. The trip to see the changing of the guard was her therapist's idea, controlled exposure, she'd called it, the careful practice of being in a busy, structured, predictable place where the noise had edges and a shape, where something happened on a schedule you could count down to. We had built up to it for weeks. We'd looked at pictures of the red coats and the tall hats every night before bed. I'd walked her through it on the kitchen floor with her wooden soldiers. Here is the rope, here is where we'll stand, here are the men who don't move, here is Mama, right beside you the whole time. I had done everything right. I had done everything the careful way, the slow way, the way you learn to do everything when your child lives behind glass. And the world still took 11 seconds. Her name is Marin. She was 7 that spring. She does not speak, has never spoken, not one word in 7 years, though the doctors keep using the careful phrase, not yet, the way you'd hold a door open for someone who is never coming through it. She hears everything. She understands more than the tests can measure. But she lives behind a wall of glass, and the world's noise reaches her as a kind of weather. And when the weather gets too loud, she does not cry out or run to me the way other children do. She goes quiet and still, and she drifts toward whatever is calm. That is the part that terrifies a mother in a crowd of 10,000 strangers. My daughter, when she is most afraid, does not make a sound. So I did not have the luxury of listening for her. I had to look. I want to tell you I stayed calm. I didn't. The forecourt of the old palace, that great paved square inside the wrought iron screen, where the tour buses let out and the souvenir carts ring their little bells and the crowds gather along the rope to watch the guard, is built to hold a multitude, and a multitude is exactly what was there. I turned in a full circle and saw 1,000 strangers, and not one of them was 4 feet tall with a yellow ribbon in her hair. I called her name knowing it would do nothing. I called it anyway. Marin. The word died 2 feet from my mouth. I am telling you all of this because I need you to understand the state I was in when I finally saw her, so you'll understand why I did the wrong thing first. She had crossed the rope. The crowd was packed along a braided cord that kept the public back from the sentry boxes and the long swept stretch of pavement where the guard stands his post. Nobody crosses that rope. There are signs, and there is the simple animal sense that you do not walk into the empty space around an armed man in a tall black bearskin who is not allowed, by the rules of his service, to so much as look at you. The empty space is part of the spectacle. It is the moat around the statue. Marin was standing inside the moat. She had ducked the cord at hip height the way she ducks everything that is in her way, without drama, and she had walked out across that forbidden pavement straight as a plumb line, and she had stopped about a yard from the guard's boots, and she was looking up at him. My heart did a thing I have no word for. Every part of the day I had rehearsed. What to do if she wandered, who to tell, which way the exits ran, emptied out of my head, and I shoved forward against the rope with both hands, and I think I made a sound that wasn't a word at all. 2 men in dark suits were already moving along the inside of the cordon toward her, quick and quiet, and a steward with a lanyard was lifting a radio to his mouth, and 100 phones had swung off the guard and onto the small girl who had broken the one rule of the place, and somewhere a woman said, loud, "Whose is that? Whose child is that?" in the tone people use when a thing has gone wrong and they want it to belong to someone other than themselves. "She's mine," I wanted to scream. "She's mine, and she can't hear you and she can't answer you. And if you grab her, she will fall apart in a way you have never seen and cannot fix." That was the danger, not the guard, strangers, hands. The two suited men closing in with the brisk, impersonal competence of people whose whole job is to remove a problem from a sensitive space. To them, Marin was a breach. A small one, an innocent one, but a breach, and the procedure for a breach is to take hold of it and walk it back behind the rope. And the moment one of those large, kind, well-meaning men closed a hand around my daughter's arm, she would have gone off like a struck match, not loud, never loud, but rigid and clawing and somewhere far past anything words could reach. And it would have taken me an hour to bring her back, and it would have happened in front of 1,000 cameras, and she would have carried the shape of that hour in her body for weeks. I knew all of that in the half-second it took me to start shoving through the crowd, screaming the only thing I could think to scream, which was, "Don't touch her, please, don't touch her." And the guard moved. Not much. You would have missed it if you weren't watching him the way I was suddenly watching him, with my whole life balanced on the next 2 seconds. He did not break his stance, feet still set, rifle still vertical against his shoulder, that severe and beautiful stillness still wrapped around him like a second uniform. But his head came down. Just his eyes, really, dropping from the middle distance to the small upturned face a yard from his boots. And his free hand, the gloved one resting at his side, opened slightly, palm turning a few degrees outward, the smallest possible gesture, and it stopped the two suited men cold. I saw them check. I saw them read it. One word would have been a scandal. A sentry is not supposed to speak, not supposed to acknowledge, not supposed to do anything but stand, but he had not spoken. He had only turned a gloved palm a quarter-inch toward two trained men, and somehow said, in a language that has no words, "Wait." They waited. And Marin, who flinches from the gentlest touch, who screams behind glass when the world gets loud, who had walked out alone across the most forbidden floor in the city. Marin stopped looking up at his face and leaned the side of her small head, very gently, against the wool of the guard's red sleeve. The way she leans against the cool of a window. The way she leans against me, on the rare good days when the weather inside her clears. She had found in the middle of 10,000 roaring strangers, the one thing in that entire square that was perfectly, deliberately, gloriously still. And she had trusted it. I stopped shoving. I stopped screaming. I stood at the rope with my hand pressed to my mouth, and I watched my silent daughter rest her head against a stranger's arm, and I understood, with the cold clarity that only comes when you have just nearly lost everything, that the safest place for her in that entire square was exactly where she had put herself. The guard had not moved his feet. He would not, I would learn, move them for a long time yet. But he had moved everything that mattered, and every camera in that forecourt had stopped filming a soldier and had started filming something none of them had a word for either. I just didn't know yet how far he would go to keep her there. The nearer of the two suited men crouched at the edge of the rope and beckoned me through with a sharp tilt of his head. "Ma'am, is she yours?" "Yes," I got under the cord. My knees did not want to hold me. "Yes, she's mine, please, please don't let anyone grab her, she can't." "She can't what?" Not unkind, just fast the way they are trained to be fast. "She doesn't speak. She has autism, she's nonverbal, and if you take hold of her arm when she's like this she will," I ran out of breath. "She'll panic. It'll be bad for her. Please, just let me get to her. Let me get to her and I'll take her out and you'll never see us again." The man's whole posture changed. I have learned to watch for that change. In a doctor, in a teacher, in a stranger. The moment the word lands and they stop seeing a naughty child who climbed the rope and start seeing a child who is somewhere none of the rest of us can follow. He keyed his radio low and said something I didn't catch, and the other man, who had been a half stride from reaching for her, eased back and put his hands behind him. I went toward my daughter the way you cross a frozen pond. Slow, light. I did not call her name again. Names mean nothing to her in that state. They are just more weather, and I did not reach for her. I came around to the side where she could see me coming, and I knelt down on the cold paving stones an arm's length from her and the guard's boots, and I made myself small, and I made myself slow, and I made myself, with everything I had, calm. "Hey, Bug," I said very quietly, "I see you." She did not look at me. She kept the side of her head against the wool of the guard's sleeve, and her eyes were on the far distance the way his were, and her breathing, I could see it now. I was close enough, her breathing was slow. Even. The shallow racing flutter she gets in a crowd was gone. She had found a still point and she had matched herself to it, the way she matches her breath to the ticking of the big clock at home, the only sound in the house she will sit beside for an hour. I looked up at the guard. I had never been that close to one. The discipline of him at that range is a strange thing, the polished chinstrap, the gleam of the bearskin's long fur, the metals catching the gray light, the absolute economy of a man holding himself motionless by an act of pure will. And his eyes were not on me, and they were not quite on the middle distance anymore either. They had dropped that last quarter-inch, and they were resting, there is no other word, on the small head leaning against his arm, watching the breathing, keeping the stillness for her on purpose. A man whose entire profession is to ignore the crowd was using that very discipline, deliberately, as a thing to lean a frightened child against. "Thank you," I whispered. He could not answer. I understood that he could not answer. So I did the only thing I could, and I stayed where I was, and I matched my breathing to hers, which was matched to his, the three of us breathing in a slow line in the middle of the loudest place I have ever stood, while the steward with the lanyard came hurrying up at last. While I knelt there, I noticed a thing I have never told anyone because it would sound mad. He had begun to breathe for her. Not loudly, I could not have heard it over the crowd, but I could see it, the slow lift and fall of the red wool at his chest, exaggerated just a fraction past what a resting man does, slow and deep, and even the way you breathe at the bedside of a child you are trying to coax towards sleep. He had clocked in that first half-second, the thing it took the rest of us minutes to understand, that she was tuning herself to whatever was nearest and steadiest, and he had quietly made himself the metronome. A man forbidden to speak had found the one channel still open to him and was using it, breath by deliberate breath, to bring a stranger's daughter down. I have wondered ever since whether they teach that, or whether it was the father in him. I think I know which. I want to tell you what I was so afraid of, because it will explain the size of what he gave us. 2 years before, in a different city, Marin had bolted in a railway station, and a transit officer, a good man, doing exactly what he was trained to do, had scooped her up to carry her to safety, and she had gone rigid and screaming in his arms, and it had taken me 40 minutes on a cold platform floor to bring her back, and she had not let me wash her hair for a fortnight afterward, because the feeling of hands near her head had become the feeling of that platform. That is what a kind, fast, well-meant grab does to my daughter. So when I tell you that a soldier in a bearskin hat spared us all of that by the radical act of standing still and breathing slow, you'll understand why I have never stopped being grateful. "Thank you," I whispered again to him, knowing he wouldn't and couldn't answer, and his chest rose and fell, slow and sure, and that was answer enough. The steward with the lanyard came hurrying up at last. "Right," the steward said, brisk, professional, faintly out of breath. "We need to move the child off the parade ground. We'll take you both to—" "No," I said, "please don't move her." "Ma'am, the sentry is on duty. We really can't." I know he's on duty. I'm not asking him to do anything. I'm asking you to give me 3 minutes. If you move her now while she's like this, you will undo the only good thing that's happened in the last 10 minutes, and it will get loud, and you do not want loud, and neither do I. I kept my voice low and level, and I never took my eyes off Marin. 3 minutes. She's calming herself. Let her finish. Then she'll walk out with me on her own 2 feet, and no one has to carry a screaming child past 300 phones. Trust me. I've done the other version. Nobody wants the other version. The steward looked at the 2 suited men. One of them gave a small nod, and I will be grateful to those 3 men for the rest of my life, because they did the hardest thing that people in charge of a crowd can do, which is nothing. They held their positions. They widened the empty space instead of shrinking it. The nearer-suited man even turned outward and put up a flat, calm hand at the press of onlookers leaning over the rope, and the message of that hand was the same as the message of the guards. Not yet. Give them room. And in the middle of that suddenly gentle, suddenly patient ring of grown men, my daughter stood with her head against a soldier's red sleeve and let the world come down off the boil. It is hard to describe what the crowd did, because it was not one thing. Near the front, the people who could see, who could actually read what was happening, the kneeling mother and the silent child and the men holding their distance, went quiet and soft in the way that decent people do when they understand they're looking at something fragile. But the crowd is deep, and the back of a crowd never understands. It only feels denied. Somewhere behind me, a man's voice rose, complaining that he couldn't see, that he'd waited an hour, asking loudly why nobody was doing anything about the kid. A phone was thrust over a shoulder on a selfie stick, the lens swinging blindly for an angle. The pressure of all those people who only wanted their photograph of a soldier, and had instead been given a weight they didn't understand, built against the rope like water against a low wall. The nearer-suited man felt it too. He didn't turn his back on us, but he widened his stance and lifted both hands, and he began to talk to the front rank in a low, steady, almost bored voice. Nothing to see, folks. Give them a moment. All's well. Just give them a moment. The voice you use to keep a thing from becoming a thing. And it worked, mostly. A crowd will follow a calm man if there's one to follow. But I understood, kneeling there on the cold stone with my pulse in my ears, that the calm we were all standing inside was not a natural calm. It was a manufactured one. 4 or 5 grown men were spending real effort, every second, to hold a quiet space open around my daughter, against the natural pull of 10,000 people who would rather it ended. And at the center of that effort, doing the most and moving the least, stood the man in the bearskin, who had decided to be the still post the whole thing turned on. I should tell you what it costs, not the guard. I'll come to him, me. It costs me, every single time, to do nothing while the people around me wait for me to fix my child the way they fix theirs, with a word, a hug, a sharp "that's enough." I cannot do those things. The fix for Marin is the absence of force. It is space and stillness and time, and the world is not built to give a mother those 3 things in public. The world is built for the quick grab, the firm hand, the brisk removal. I have spent 7 years learning to stand my ground against well-meaning people who want to help by doing the exact wrong thing, and I was bracing to do it again. And instead, for once, a square full of strangers and a soldier in a bearskin hat were doing it with me. Then a man in a different uniform came through the crowd, and I felt the whole fragile thing begin to tip. He was older, gray at the temples, a peaked cap instead of a bearskin, the kind of dress that says officer rather than sentry, more braid, more bearing, the unmistakable air of a man whom the others straighten up for. He came up the inside of the cordon at a measured pace, taking in the scene with one sweep. The broken rope, the child against the sentry's arm, the kneeling mother, the careful ring of his men holding their distance. And I thought, here it comes. I thought, now the rules arrive. Because that is what a senior man in a uniform usually is, the arrival of the rules. And the rules say a sentry stands alone in an empty space. And the rules do not have a column for a 7-year-old who has decided that a soldier's sleeve is the safest wall in the world. He stopped a little apart from us. He did not crouch. He stood with his gloved hands folded behind him, and he looked for a long moment at the sentry, and the sentry, I watched this happen, the sentry did not look back at him. Did not snap to, did not acknowledge, did not so much as flick his eyes. He held his post, and he held the stillness around the child, and he let his officer stand there and decide, because to break his stance for the officer would have been to break it for Marin, and the sentry had made his choice about which of the two men mattered more in that minute. I have replayed the next part so many times. The officer looked at the sentry. Then he looked down at Marin, at the slow, even breathing, at the way she had folded one small hand into the cuff of the red sleeve without anyone telling her she could. And then he looked at me, kneeling on the stones with my face wet, and he asked me one question, very quietly, in a voice pitched not to carry. Will moving her hurt her? Not we need to move her. Not you'll have to take her now. Will moving her hurt her? I have met that question maybe 4 times in 7 years from a stranger, and every single time I have wanted to put my forehead on the floor in gratitude. Yes, I said. Not physically, but yes. She's bringing herself down right now. If we break it, she'll spike and it'll be much worse and much longer, and she won't understand any of it, and she'll be frightened in a way she can't tell anyone about. If you can give her a few minutes to finish, she'll come away calm. I promise you she'll come away calm. The officer was quiet. Around us the forecourt had gone into a strange hush. Not silent, you can't silence 10,000 people, but lowered, the way a room lowers when something is happening at the front of it that everyone has decided to respect. The phones were still up. I had stopped caring about the phones. What's her name? The officer asked. Marin. He nodded slowly, and then he did something I did not expect, something I think about still. He did not order the sentry to do anything. He simply took one step back, widening the circle again, giving it more room, not less, and he said low to the steward and the 2 suited men, "Hold the line where it is. No one closes on them." The child sets the pace. And then, almost to himself, in the tone of a man stating a fact rather than bending a rule, "The post can be still for a child. The post is for things like this. The post is for things like this." I did not fully understand it then. I understand it now. He was not granting an exception to the discipline. He was telling me, telling all of us, what the discipline had been for all along, underneath the spectacle and the cameras and the tour bus crowds. A man stands motionless at the threshold of a great house so that the things inside are safe. That is the whole point of him. And on that afternoon, the thing that needed to be safe was a small girl who could not say so, and she had walked up to the safest still thing in the square and put her head against it. And the officer was not about to be the man who decided that the rule book outranked the reason the rule book exists. So he let his sentry stand, and he let me wait. And for 3 minutes, the steward timed it, he told me afterward, 3 minutes and 40 seconds, nothing happened on purpose, with the full authority of the household behind it, in front of the whole world. It was the longest and the gentlest 3 minutes of my life. From the outside, those minutes looked like nothing. A child standing against a soldier, a kneeling woman, a ring of waiting men. But inside Marin, something enormous and delicate was happening. She was doing the hardest work she ever does, the work no one can do for her, finding the floor of herself again. When the world tips her over, there is no shortcut back. You cannot reason her up, or hug her up, or hurry her up. She has to climb, hand over hand, from wherever the noise has thrown her, and the only thing that helps is the one thing the world almost never gives her, a fixed point that will not move while she climbs. A railing, a wall, a still man. And here, for once, the fixed point was not merely tolerating her grip. It was holding steady on purpose, breathing slow on purpose, being a wall on purpose, while a whole great house arranged itself to buy her the time. I have stopped trying to think of it as a debt. Some kindnesses are too large to be debts. You can only pass them along. And she climbed. I watched her climb. I watched my daughter's shoulders come down. I watched the small white-knuckled grip on the wool sleeve loosen, finger by finger, until her hand only rested there. I watched her eyes come back from the far distance to the middle distance, and then at last, in their own time, drop to me, to my face. She looked at me. There was recognition in it, and there was the particular exhausted softness she gets when a storm has passed through her and gone. And she did the thing she does instead of words, which is to lift 2 fingers and touch them very lightly to her own cheek. Her sign, the one we made up together when she was 3. That means I'm here. The weather cleared, I'm here. I touched 2 fingers to my own cheek back. There you are, I whispered. There you are, Bug. And then, only then, in her own time, on her own 2 feet, she peeled her head off the guard's sleeve, and she turned, and she took the 2 steps to me and folded into my arms, and I gathered her up off that cold, famous pavement and stood, and the whole square let out a breath I hadn't known it was holding. I thought that was the end of it. I thought the miracle was already over. I was wrong about that too. The officer walked us off the parade ground himself, one hand hovering near my elbow without ever quite touching it, steering the suited men aside, parting the crowd. He took us to a quiet room off the colonnade, cool stone, a window onto an inner courtyard where no tourists came, a bench, a glass of water that a steward brought without being asked. Marin sat against me with her thumb in the cuff of my sleeve now instead of the guard's, breathing the long, slow breaths of a child who has come through something, and the officer sat across from us and let her settle before he said a word. She wasn't frightened of him, he said at last. It wasn't a question, he'd seen it too. No, I said. She's frightened of fast things, loud things, things that grab. He was the opposite of all of that. I laughed a little, the wrung-out laugh that comes after. She walked across the most dangerous-looking floor in the city to lean on the one man who would absolutely, definitely, no matter what, hold still. The officer almost smiled. He's good at holding still. How does he do that? Just stand there with a child against him and not move and not, I don't know, freeze up. Most people freeze up. Most people make it worse without meaning to. He was quiet for a moment, choosing what to tell me. The man on that post, he said, has stood it 11 years. He stood it in heat that drops grown men and in cold that cracks the paving. He stood it through a fire alarm that emptied the whole forecourt and a state visit with the world's press in his face, and a fool who once tried to climb him like a fence. A flicker there of the dry humor old soldiers keep. Standing still while everything happens at you, that's the job. That's the whole job. Anyone can move. The hard thing, the thing it takes years to learn, is to not move when not moving is right. He knew the second your girl crossed the rope that the worst thing in the world he could do was react. So he didn't. He gave her the one thing he had 1,000 hours of practice giving. He gave her his stillness. The officer looked at Marin. Turns out it's worth more than I ever knew. I looked down at Marin, half asleep against me, and I thought about all the rooms we had been in that were the opposite of this one. The supermarket with its flickering lights and its tan, and the cashier who told me brightly that he just needed to use his words. The birthday party we'd left after 9 minutes. The clinic waiting room with the loud television bolted too high to switch off, where a kind nurse had crouched and reached for Marin's hand to lead her in, and set off 40 minutes I would not wish on anyone. Everywhere we go, the world reaches for her. It reaches with the best intentions and it reaches fast, and the reaching is the thing that breaks her, and I have never once managed to make a stranger understand that in time. The whole architecture of public life is built on the friendly grab, the helpful steer, the hand on the shoulder, and my daughter is a child for whom every one of those is a small catastrophe. And here, in the one place I had been most afraid of, a place of armed men and iron rules and a 1,000-strong crowd, not one person had reached for her. The one place built entirely around a man who is forbidden to move had turned out to be the only place that had ever, instinctively, given her exactly what she needed. I started to laugh, and it turned into something else halfway, and the officer looked away politely and let me have it. "I'm sorry," I said when I could. "Don't be," he waited. "You spend a lot of time apologizing, I'd guess." I wiped my face, all day, every day for her. To people who are annoyed and people who are kind, doesn't matter, I apologize to all of them. It's the tax. I looked at him. Nobody made me apologize out there. Your men, the steward, him. Nobody made me explain or excuse or hurry. Do you know how rare that is? I can count on one hand the number of strangers in 7 years who just made room, and 4 of them were standing in your forecourt today." The officer was quiet for a moment. "We're in the business of standing still and letting people come to us," he said. "Maybe we're better at making room than most. I'd not thought of it that way before today." He looked at Marin properly, the way few people let themselves look. "She's a brave girl, walked across that floor like she owned it. Half my recruits wouldn't." "She doesn't know it's brave," I said. "She just knew it was quiet." I felt the tears come back and I let them. "Will he get in trouble for any of it?" The hand he raised to stop your men, he moved. I saw him move. "He moved a gloved hand 1/4 of an inch," the officer said, "to keep 2 of my men from making a serious mistake. If that's the worst thing a sentry of mine ever does on post, I'll die a contented man." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "No, ma'am, he won't get in trouble. There's a thing people misunderstand about discipline. They think it means following the rule no matter what. It doesn't. It means knowing what the rule is for, so that on the rare day the rule and its purpose point in different directions, you have the judgment and the nerve to serve the purpose. That man served the purpose perfectly today. The rule says stand your post and protect what's behind you. He stood his post, and he protected what was in front of him too." He sat back. "I'll be putting that in writing." I asked his name then, the sentries. The officer hesitated, the way they do, and then told me only the smallest thing, that I could send a letter to the regiment, addressed to the sentry of the West Forecourt post for that watch, and it would reach him. They don't hand out names to strangers, and I understood. But he said one more thing, and it has stayed with me. "He has a daughter," the officer said, "about your girl's age. He'd not thank me for telling you that, so I'll deny I did. But I watched his face when yours leaned against him, and I'd lay money he was thinking of his own. We're not statues, ma'am, whatever the postcards say. We just learned to stand like them." I have turned that sentence over more times than I can count. We just learned to stand like them. All my life I had seen those guards the way the tourists do, a costume, a spectacle, a curiosity that doesn't blink. I had never once thought about the person inside the discipline, about what it costs and what it's for. And it had taken my wordless daughter, who reads people the way the rest of us read weather, to walk past every distracted adult in that square and find the one human being whose whole training had bent him toward exactly the gift she needed. She hadn't been fooled by the costume. Children like her are supposed to miss everything that matters about people. She had not missed a thing. While we talked, Marin had slid off the bench. She did this without fuss, the way she does everything, and she'd gone to the window that looked onto the inner courtyard, and she'd put both palms and her forehead flat against the cool glass, looking out at the empty stone and the one tree and the gray light. It is one of her places. She finds the still corner of any room and she goes to it. I half rose, but the officer made a small motion, let her, and we watched her stand there breathing on the glass, fogging a little circle and watching it shrink, perfectly content, perfectly safe, in a palace she had entered by breaking its single most important rule. The officer watched her for a long moment with an expression I couldn't read, and then he said, very quietly, almost to himself, "Funny. We keep this whole place still for kings. Turns out it was always going to be most use to someone like her." He cleared his throat, embarrassed, the way men of his kind get when a true thing comes out of them sideways. When Marin had her color back and her breathing was easy, and she drunk half the glass of water and tipped the rest, with great deliberation, onto the floor, a very Marin thing to do, a sign of total recovery, and the steward only laughed and mopped it, we made to leave. The officer walked us back out along the colonnade toward the far gate, the quiet way, away from the crowd. And our path took us along the inner edge of the parade ground, behind the sentry boxes, past the back of the post. It was nearly the relief. I didn't know that then. I learned it later. Every 2 hours the guard is changed, the old sentry marched off and a fresh one marched on, a small ceremony of stamping and presented arms that the tourists love. We happened to be passing, screened by the colonnade pillars, just as the relief party came up, and the officer, seeing it, put out a hand and stopped us, gently in the shadow of a pillar. "Watch," he said, "just a moment, then we'll go." The relief came up with a crack of heels on stone. The new sentry took his place. The orders were given low and clipped. Arms were presented and shouldered. And the man who had stood the west forecourt post, the man with the 11 years and the daughter he'd never owned to, turned smartly off his post for the first time in 2 hours and began the marched return along the inside of the line, his part of the watch finished, the spectacle done. His route brought him toward our pillar. I felt Marin stir against me. She had been drowsing, the deep clean sleepiness that comes down on her after a storm, her cheek on my shoulder. But she lifted her head, and she looked not at the noise, not at the stamping, not at the crowd beyond the rope. She looked, straight and certain, at the one figure among all of them that she knew. She picked him out of a moving line of identical red tunics and tall black hats, the way she picks the one clock in the house, the one window, the one still thing. She knew him. Children like Marin are supposed to be the ones who can't read a room. She'd read the whole square down to the single soul in it that had been kind to her, and she knew him on sight. And she lifted 2 fingers and touched them to her own cheek. "I'm here, the weather cleared, I'm here." She wasn't doing it for me. I was right there, she had no need to tell me. She was doing it at him. Her sign, her one word, the only language she has, sent across 20 feet of palace stone to a stranger in a uniform, the way another child might wave. He was marching. He was on the move, in formation, in front of the world, and the rules of that march are as old and as strict as the rules of the post. A man returning off the relief does not stop, does not turn his head, does not break the line for anything short of fire or blood. He stopped. 1 pace out of the column, the smallest possible halt, there and gone, and his head turned, and he found her in the shadow of the pillar, the small girl with the yellow ribbon and the 2 fingers against her cheek. And the most disciplined man I have ever seen, the man whose entire art is the refusal to react, slowly lifted his own white-gloved hand and touched 2 fingers to his own cheek. "I'm here." He gave her her word back. He held it for a single heartbeat. Then his hand came down, and his head came forward, and he stepped back into the line as if he had never left it, and marched on, and was gone through the inner arch, and the relief was over, and the tourists who hadn't been watching the right 20 feet never knew that anything had happened at all. But I knew, the officer beside me knew. I heard him breathe out slow through his nose, the way men do when they've seen something they'll carry. And Marin knew. She put her head back down on my shoulder with a small sigh, the most settled sound I had heard out of her in a week, and within a minute she was genuinely asleep, heavy and trusting and done, and I carried her out through the quiet gate into the ordinary street where the ordinary world was waiting, exactly as we'd left it, with no idea. People ask me, when the clip went around, because of course there was a clip, there were 100 clips, the square had been a forest of phones. People ask me what I think the guard was. Whether he was just very good at his job, or whether he understood somehow what my daughter is and what she needs. Whether the still wall she leaned against knew it was being leaned on. I think both. I think he was very good at his job, and I think his job, properly understood, is exactly the thing my daughter needed. The world spends so much energy teaching children like Marin to tolerate a world that will not slow down for them, to bear the noise, to endure the grabbing, to survive the speed. And here was a grown man whose whole profession was to be the one fixed, slow, silent, unhurried point in a roaring place. A man trained for years to do nothing beautifully on purpose, so that the thing in his care would be safe. She didn't need him to understand her. She needed him to hold still. And holding still, it turned out, was the one thing in all the world he was the very best at. The clip did things online that I won't pretend to understand. People wrote that it made them cry on a train, in an office, in a hospital waiting room. That they had finally understood something they'd seen their whole lives and never thought about. That those motionless men at the great houses are not furniture. That the stillness is a discipline, and the discipline is a kind of care. There was a message from a woman 3 countries away whose son is like Marin, who said she had taken her boy to see the guard at her own city's palace, and that he had stared at the still man for an hour and been, for that whole hour, calm. I think about that boy. The same stillness reached him through a phone and then in person, with a different man inside a different uniform, because it was never about the man. It was about what the men have all agreed to be. I have come to think the discipline is a promise. Every one of those motionless figures makes the same silent vow to everyone who passes. I will not be moved by my own fear, or my own boredom, or my own wish to be somewhere else. I will hold. Most days that promise is just a postcard. But it is a real promise, and my daughter happened to be the right person on the right day. She could not read the signs or hear the warnings, but she could read a kept promise, and she walked the length of a roaring square to stand inside it. I wrote the letter. I addressed it the way the officer told me to the sentry of the West Forecourt post for that watch, and I told him what he'd given us, not just the 3 minutes but the proof. The proof that there are places in the world built around the idea that the strong stand motionless so the small can be safe, and that the people who keep those places have not all forgotten what the standing is for. I told him Marin still touches 2 fingers to her cheek sometimes at home, looking at nothing, and that I think she's saying it to him. I'm here. The weather cleared. I'm here. I never got a letter back. I didn't expect one. That isn't how they're allowed to be. But about a month later, a small flat parcel came to the house with no return address, and inside, wrapped in tissue, was a single white ceremonial glove, clean and pressed, and a card with 3 words on it in a careful, square soldier's hand. For the still one. Marin keeps it on the shelf by the clock. She doesn't play with it. She isn't that kind of child. She just likes to know it's there, the way she likes to know the clock is there, and the window and me. A still thing in a loud world that she can lean on when the weather comes. And on the days the weather is very bad, when nothing I do is enough and the world is too fast and too sharp and too much, I take the glove down off the shelf, and I fold it into her hand, and I sit with her, and I hold still. It's all he did. It turned out to be everything.